Hello everyone, welcome back to Everything Swift. Today we'll be tackling another legal question, number 213, titled House Robber 2. I did the first question, House Robber 1, a year back, so if you haven't checked out the video, please feel free to check that out first before continuing this video. And the reason why I'm suggesting that is because we are going to use the solution in House Robber 1, the first question, and build it on top in this question, right? So let's go ahead and check out the question that we have to tackle today. So in this question, we are given a hypothetical scenario where we are a robber and we're supposed to rob houses along a street. And the houses basically contain money inside that we are intending to steal, intending to rob. The big condition here and the differentiation between house robber 2 and house robber 1 is basically the houses are arranged in a circle. This one is really key, and this throws the curveball to the solution that we want to reuse from house robber 1. So the goal for us is obviously to get the maximum amount of money that we can rob, but we do not want to alert the police, right? And how we are going to alert the police is basically we are going to rob adjacent houses, which also mean like back-to-back houses, right? So, for example, in this example here, we are not allowed to rob 2 and 3, right? Houses, the first index, the zero index, and the first index, because that is adjacent, right? We also can't rob 3 and 2, right? Because this is also back to back. And as I mentioned, because these houses arranged in the circle is basically the biggest differentiation between this question and the first one. In this question, it also means that the first house and the last house are also connected, right? So this last index 2 and the first index 2 are basically connected because they are arranged in a circle. What that means is that we can, when we are facing the situation of robbing the first house and the second house, we cannot do that because if we rob both those houses, we basically just alert the police, right? And we'll get caught, which is not our goal. So how do we avoid that, right? So the strategy to solve this question is essentially breaking down the choices that we have to rob into two set of houses, right? Because we know that robbing the first house and the last house is basically not allowed because we're going to get caught by the police. So to avoid that, the strategy is to break down basically the first set of houses is basically ignoring the last house, right? So there's the first set of houses, and the second set of houses is basically we ignore the first house and basically just take any the remaining houses, right? So that way we will never face the scenario of the first house and the last house where we rob back to back and alert the police, right? So once we do that, then essentially the whole solution from video 1 is basically the same, and we can reapply it here, where we check at every index what is the maximum amount of money, and then we build that array, and then we find out what is the maximum money that we can get from the given set of houses. So the only differentiation between this question and the first one is basically the first and the last house being connected, and the way we're going to avoid that is basically creating two set of houses that we intend to rob, and then we're going to calculate the maximum amount of money from both those set of houses, and then we basically will know which one will give us the highest money, and at the same time avoid being caught in the scenario of robbing first and the last house, right? So I think that's enough chit chat. So let's jump straight into code. I think it'll be much clearer of what I'm trying to say here, right? So as always, I'm just going to create a condition to exit out as fast as possible for just some tiny improvement or code performance essentially. So if the number of houses that we get is less than 3, basically we can just return the maximum uh, money from this given array, right? So essentially if we have 1 and 2, for example, right, we can't rob both of these houses because we'll get caught since they are adjacent houses back to back. So we can only take the first house or the last house, right? So essentially that's what this condition does to avoid that scenario. And then the second thing is basically we want to split the set of houses into two set essentially, right? So the first one is basically, I'll just call it a constant of houses A, and I'll create an array of this array slice. So all the way to nums.count -2. So basically we are taking the first house all the way except the last house, so that we avoid the first house and the last house scenario. And then the second set is basically taking the ignoring the first house, but we take all the way to the end, right? So that way uh, the houses A constant basically just ignore the last house, and the houses B basically ignore the first house. Yeah, so that's how we avoid the scenario of getting caught for the starting and the last house being back to back, and we rob accidentally or robbing both the houses. So in that sense, we're going to create a helper function here called max money, and we are going to take the houses uh, array, and then this function essentially will calculate the maximum money that we can rob from the given set of houses. So basically this function here is essentially the solution from house robber 1. That's exactly the same. So we're going to create a array, and I'm just going to fill it out with zeros, houses.count. Essentially what this max money array represents is the maximum amount of money that we can rob at each houses, right? So at index 0, basically we face the option of like robbing one house, and the maximum amount of money that we can rob at one house is basically that house itself, right? So basically that is the maximum. Sorry, max 0. First index, and then the second index at index 1 is basically, now we are faced with two choices, right? The first house and the second house, but remember we cannot rob both of them because they are adjacent houses back to back, so we'll get caught if we rob both of them. So how we want to avoid that is basically just determine the max of house at index 0 and the current house at index 1, right? So essentially once we do that, we'll avoid the scenario of robbing back-to-back houses. And then the remaining one we're just going to build on top of it with a for loop all the way to houses.count. Oops, I forget an in here. And then here we're just going to build the max money, essentially the same formula as the first video. So max money of sorry, keep forgetting today, max money, and then here what we're going to do is calculate, right, max money of I minus 2 plus houses I, right? So essentially we are saying that do we want to rob this current house and two houses back of it, right? Because we can't rob the house before it because it's back to back, right? So the only option if you want to rob this current house is essentially taking this current house money and two houses ago and sum it up. That will give us the maximum money. Or the other option is basically just take one house ago, the maximum, right? So max money of I minus 1, right? So that should build up our remaining max money array, and then essentially the last index will represent the maximum money that we can rob from the given houses set, right? So we just return the last index, right? Because this array essentially represents the maximum money at every index, right? Like houses. So for example, the first index, which is we are only faced with house 1, and what's the maximum of it? The first house, right? So this for loop will basically just build up and basically at each index it represents the maximum amount of money that we can get given the houses that we have seen. So yeah, so this function is set up, and then here we will return max A, which is max money, and then just pass houses A, and then the max B is basically max money houses B. So once that's done, we'll just return max A and max B, right? So this solution here should avoid the scenario of getting caught, the first and last house, because we break the houses into two options. We ignore the last house in houses A, we ignore the first house in houses B, and then we just compute the maximum based on the houses set, houses A, houses B, and then that will tell us the maximum amount of money. Then we'll just return the maximum given what we have computed. So that should be it. That should be the solution. Let me just go ahead and run it. Hopefully I got it right. There we go. Looks good. Let me try and submit this. And looks good. It passed. So basically, yeah. Basically, this private function here is basically the solution is exactly the same as the first one, house robber one. The only difference is we have to split the houses into two sets, and then everything else is basically the same. So yeah, hopefully you guys find this video helpful. If you do, please subscribe. It will help to grow this channel. And once again, thanks for your time. Take care and bye bye.